Welcome to episode 2 of the AFA Genxt Podcast. My name is Ashley Mahadia, New South Wales Chair for the Genxt Community of Practice and your host for this episode. A big thank you to the AFA for allowing us to host this podcast and to our supporting partner, Advice Intelligence, for powering this episode. Financial advisors are continuously facing new challenges and the level of stress within the advice world is peaking. New educational requirements, increased operational cost, insurance commissions drying up, costly compliance regimes, you name it, advisors have seen it all. The aim of this episode is to show that, as ever, with great challenges come great opportunities. In today's episode, we speak with Deborah Kent, Director and Owner of Integra Financial Services, Bill Webster, Practice Owner and former financial advisor, and Peter Graham, Retirement Coach and former financial advisor. These legends of our industry have a combined 125 years of experience as financial advisors and will share tips and tricks on how to overcome challenges and stand the test of time. Deb, Bill and Peter, welcome to episode 2 of the AFA Genxt Podcast. It's an incredible honor for me to have you three today as guests on our podcast. I've done some work earlier and you have a combined 125 years of experience as financial advisors. That's impressive.
That must make me pretty young then, I think.
I'm glad that's not our ages, but that's good.
We want this episode to be obviously about the challenges that we're currently facing as financial advisors, about how you've faced challenges throughout your career, how you've overcome those challenges. We want this to be a feel-good episode for the younger generation of advisors. So let's get straight into it. What has been the highlight of your career?
Oh, look, I've been lucky to have quite a lot of highlights in my career, which is really nice. I'd say the main ones for me were becoming the AFA president. That was a real highlight for me. I never thought that I would do something like that. And I guess for anybody out there, I always say, put yourself out there. If you think it's something you can't do, go and do it. And being the president of the AFA gave me a lot of opportunities, and it was just such a wonderful experience. Yes, there was some tough times with it, given the fact that we were going through some pretty heavy legislation, but it also taught me a lot about politics and negotiation and a lot of things. My other career highlight was launching Inspire, Connecting Women in Advice. It was something I'd been wanting to do for quite a long time. And that was just, it was just a real highlight, not only for me, but for a lot of my friends and the lovely women who helped me launch that AFA brand, or community of practice as we call it. It was a wonderful experience. And look, it's still going and it's still growing. And I think it's been one of the best women's groups in the industry, and I feel that it still is. The last thing that I'd like to say is a highlight of my career was actually attending Stanford University. I was at the time licensed under Garvin, part of the MLC group, and we had the opportunity to go to Stanford, and I ended up going twice. I loved it so much. For someone like me to go to Stanford and have that education at such a high level was just blew my mind. I always remember when I came home from that, my husband saying to me, "You're a different person. You've walked in the door a different person." It gave me confidence. It gave me resilience. It expanded my brain like you've got no idea. And that was truly a highlight in a personal sense for me, because it built me personally to continue the career that I have now and the business that I have now.
Yeah, look, fantastic, Deb. What great experiences have come out of just having a go. As you said, if there's something to be done, get it done. For me, I think I'll give you two examples, business and personal. But from a business perspective, 40 years in the industry, I think my greatest highlight was my succession plan, because I was 52 in 2004 when I sat down, and FSRA was just coming in, licensing was a new thing, and I looked at my situation, and I had been in a partnership for about 11 years, and I'd been 7 years out of that. So sort of rebranded myself and had a couple of staff. And I looked back at what I wrote, and it clearly said to me, Bill, you need to be with some people that have got some savvy on some other areas that you're not very strong at. And that led me to about a year later meeting up with Colin, and we got talking over lunch at a conference, and that began a relationship that ended up in 2012 with him acquiring my equity in the practice. And like 2 days after my 60th birthday, which is the date was set when we first joined, and we actually accomplished it. And then I continued to work on there until December last year. But the succession plan brought me so much more than I ever expected. So many wonderful experiences. The young team we had, which grew and grew to about 10, and all the innovation that we got, a lot of which was driven by Colin and his initiatives. But there was still a very strong role for me to play in terms of mentorship and team leadership and those sorts of things. But it was just a wonderful experience. So from end of 2005 to the end of 2021, it's a long relationship which just started with a piece of paper and a goal to achieve something. So for me, that's been my greatest outcome of my career. On a personal level, I just think the level of meaning that this career has brought to my life, I just couldn't imagine not having done what I've done for 40 years. And like a lot of my generation, I fell into the business by accident at a party and had a few wines, and you got talking to a guy in the industry, and all of a sudden they saw more in you than you actually saw in yourself. And I think that tells you a lot about the power of mentorship, which our industry, I don't think has a peer in that department. In most other industries, you won't talk to the opposition, but we're very willing to share ideas and learn from each other. And the journey's just brought so much meaning to my life. I just could never be more grateful than I am for what I've experienced.
Well, my greatest highlight was that I was able to endlessly seek more and more knowledge. And this was a personal choice, and it came from various organisations. AFA was definitely a leader in this area. $1 Million Round Table was too. But I also took the opportunity to visit people all around the world, and that was in America and England and Canada and Bermuda and all over the place, to get knowledge from people who knew more than I did. Now, all of those people had a funny way about us answering questions when you asked them. They did. And that's exactly how I expanded my knowledge, and how I just enjoyed it so much, being able to do this. And all of those people that I asked, no matter what level they were, CEOs of huge international organisations down to actuaries to salespeople to everyone, all of them were interesting and interested.
Financial advisors will always face new challenges, and I'm interested to understand what has been the greatest challenge you have overcome in your career.
Yeah, look, I think if I can look back on that 40 period, we've just had constant challenges. About every 5 years, something seems to raise its head, and you've got to deal with it for a year or two and move on. And it's just been like a recycled chaos every 5 years. And I think for me, the thing that's been the biggest challenge is staying relevant. If we look at growing your business, getting a client's easy. Keeping them for 30 years is a hard part. And keeping the clients under your tutelage for that long so they become an intrinsic part of the sale of your business is you staying relevant. Because like most relationships, be it coach, player, advisor, client, husband, wife, whatever, as soon as one party loses relevance to the other, the relationship's under threat. And it doesn't matter what level, it's under threat. It may not end, but it's under threat. So the continual challenge always is to stay relevant. And even with all the changes that are going on, it's about some things you'll accept, some things you won't, but there are some things you can't do much about, so you've got to learn how to deal with them. And in amongst all of that, be able to convert that to some sort of relevancy that then translates out to your business situation. Then you've got your own personal life, because if that's not going well, then it'll show up at the office. there's a really big challenge in all aspects of your life to stay relevant, because if you've got a happy personal life, it'll usually translate into a pretty happy business life as well. And if it's not on one side or the other, it's going to affect one of the other. So for me, the biggest challenge has always been remaining relevant in those relationships, whatever they be. Yeah.
Well, thanks, Ash. Look, I didn't know that I had a challenge until somebody else uncovered it for me. And this happened in a very unusual way back in a long time ago in 1984. I was asked to appear as the first live talkback radio personality in Canberra. And I knew nothing about that, of course. So I found out who recommended me, and I rang that person and asked why. And he said, simply, if you can't verbalise your knowledge, you don't know it. It was a fabulous experience talking on talkback radio, because you didn't know what people were going to ask. You didn't know what the topic, you had no idea, and you had no idea who they were. And the same applies today about this business of being able to verbalise your knowledge. If it doesn't matter how many degrees you've got, or what qualifications you have, or how good your paperwork is. It doesn't matter. If you can't express your knowledge successfully, then you will struggle to succeed.
Yeah, look, I thought about this because of the question that we knew this question was coming. I guess I have to say the biggest challenge in my career was many years ago deciding to move from a licensee and go to a new one, and unfortunately ending up in Supreme Court for quite some time. Luckily, that sort of stuff doesn't happen anymore, but back then it was fairly prevalent, and it's around client ownership. That was a period in time where you could easily have just packed up your traps and said, you know what, this is just too much. I don't want to go through it. It's too much money to try and save this little business and keep it going. And I had a partner at the time as well, and we did get through it. Right, we did get through it. We changed our business structure, and I ended up taking over the business. But every day I came into work and I went, this is just really too hard, because I'm trying to deal with clients, I'm trying to deal with a court case, I've got costs rolling out of my ears, trying to maintain my personal life. But then I sat back and thought, I could walk away or I could stay. And I'll tell you what made me stay, and I've often told this story. I was sitting there in the office very late one night, and one of my clients rang me, and he was in tears, and he said to me, I have to tell you that my wife, and I obviously won't name her, but my wife has, she's got cancer, and they've told her she's only got 3 months to live, and I don't know what to do. I don't know who to talk to. I can't talk to my children because I'm so distraught. He said, and you're the first person I needed to ring to just download. And it was at that time I said to myself, you know what? This is bloody worth fighting for, this little business. And I'll keep on fighting, and I will continue to grow my business, which I did. I went home that night and I went, right, okay, I'm just going to put all this behind me and I'm just going to keep moving. At the time, I then decided to put myself out there. I put myself out for awards. I mean, for God's sake, I was going through a court case. I put myself out working with the FPA on committees. I just kept doing things to get myself out there, to build my profile while all this was going on in the background. That little business is now the business I have now. And it's a good business. And that client is actually still with me. He's very old now, but he's still with me. This business is about relationships. Why do we do it? Do we do it for the money? I could have probably earned a heap more money if I had gone and worked somewhere else. This is not what it's about. It's about the love of what you do, the relationship with your clients, changing client lives, and how they feel about you. So that, take all the regulation out of it. You know, that's always going to happen. You just have to pivot and move your business to cope with it, because it's not going to go away. I've been through, like these gentlemen here, many, many changes over the industry. And if you sit back and try to fight it, you'll go nowhere. Have the resilience, have the confidence, just keep building that business, and remember what it's all about. It's about the client and your relationship with them.
Thank you. And we're all glad you stayed in the industry.
Well said. Well said.
Now, I think the younger generation of advisors will love your responses to the next question. What is the reason for standing the test of time? You've stayed in the industry for so long. What do you think is the major reason behind your successes?
Well, simply put, I loved it. And I would have stayed a lot longer than 50 years, except that I had a little message given to me that I had 6 days to live. Now, that didn't work, but at that time, because of that, I had to move from the industry, of course. But I loved it because it was about people. It was with people. You're with people all the time. And Deborah nailed it.
Mm.
It's a relationship business. And that's what the business is about primarily. And fortunately, I learned how to communicate with people at all levels. And I worked on it very hard to do that.
Yeah, well, you've already heard part of my story as to why I stayed. Look, I believe in advice. I think advice does change people's lives. I've seen that over the 30-odd years of my career. As I said, I've got clients that are still with me and they're still paying my fees after 25 years. They see the value in what we give to them. And as I said, things do crop up like regulation and change. And I think right now we're going through a lot of change. We have such a high level of compliance. I know we're calling it an overreach, and I would say that that's probably the case. And again, you've just got to try and work with that, because if you continue to fight against it, you'll end up not going anywhere. But the reason I've stayed is for that very reason. I mean, it's like that story I told. There was no way I could walk away from that business and walk away from that client and all of my clients. I enjoy what I do. When I get up of a morning, I enjoy doing the work I do. I love speaking to people. I love the conversations that we have about not financial advice, about all wealth of things. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be their travel. It could be their hobbies. I've got a guy who's got this massive Lego that he does, that takes up half his house. It's quite funny. So you meet people, you develop relationships. It expands who you are as a person. It really does. It gives you a real different sense on life, because not only do you have your family and you have your work colleagues, but you have this expanded family, which is your business family. And I look, I'm not ready to give up. I'm still going to stick in there for as long as I possibly can, until they probably kick me out. But it is, as Graham said, it's about the relationship. It's the joy of doing what you do, and seeing somebody meet that goal that they want. That you've got them there, and they actually sit there and go, you know what, I've retired, and I can go and spend that 6 months in the south of France because that's what I wanted to do. It's just so rewarding. There's no way I would ever do anything else.
Yeah, look, I concur with my two colleagues that I feel very passionate, and my love of what I did was what kept me going. And I would suggest to any of your young viewers, if you don't like what you're doing, get out of it, more particularly because you're not doing your client a good service. If you hate what you're doing, you're a sham. If you're talking about it and you hate it, you've got to love it. It's just one of those industries where you get on a personal level with clients that's just totally not like normal life. I can remember I had a client, Tony, who was diagnosed with mesothelioma back in 2007. And he was in the Royal North Shore Hospital there. He was very emaciated, on an oxygen, and he called me in for a meeting. And he also called in the solicitor. And when the solicitor said to him, "Who's this?" and he said, "Oh, he's my life insurance man." And he looked a bit indignant at me. And Tony then, through this oxygen mask, gave it to this bloke about my situation and how important I was to him. And I walked away from that conversation that day thinking, not many people get to a conversation like that with a dying man. And I had the experience of my best mate being my first client to die. He was the best man at my wedding in 1987. And I remember being at his home that night and with all of our friends. And we didn't have babysitters back in the day, so we had all of our kids with us sharing in that evening with our friend's wife and her children, of her husband who died earlier that day. And I just remembered the feeling that I had in me, knowing that everything was going to be okay financially for that young woman and her 3 young children, who were 5, 4 and 18 months at the time. We're still great mates today, and 2 of the kids are clients of our firm, of the firm that I was part of. The relationships you build are just phenomenal. And I saw firsthand, as we handed clients across to the other advisors in the last few months before I left on Zoom calls, we had people crying and saying goodbye to me and me back to them. And the young guys said, I just can't believe what I've witnessed here in front of the camera. And as Deb alluded to, and Peter, their relationships are just incredibly powerful. And I've always felt that's been a privilege, because we get to encourage people to make decisions that could have a defining impact on their lives at some point, long before they probably need to make that decision, that we're the ones that encourage them. And in some cases, those decisions get called on, as with my best mate. But there is not a better industry to be a part of. There's nothing more meaningful. And despite all that's going on at the moment, and will come again at some other point, if you understand the humanness of this business, you will love it.
Last question. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to a young emerging advisor?
Look, the first piece of advice I'd give anyone is be yourself. Don't try and be somebody else. Be authentic to who you are. And I especially shout that out to the female young advisors out there, because we tend to change the way we are, change the way we look, change the way we dress, because somebody tells us that that's the way it's going to be. And especially when you're young. I did start as an advisor when I was 28, so I know what it's like. And I was told that no one would ever take me seriously because I had blonde hair. These sorts of things. Be yourself, be authentic. People relate to people who are honest. Tell the truth, right? If it's something that you think the client's not going to want to hear, just tell them anyway, because they'll appreciate it if you do. This business is about that. It's about having good conversations, but it's also about having hard ones, because if you're going to get people on the journey to meet their goals of what they want to do with their future, sometimes you have to have those hard conversations, and they are hard. But the best piece of advice I can say to you is be yourself, be authentic. Know your stuff. You have to know your stuff because you're expected to, but just be yourself, and you will connect with people if you do that. People see through someone who's not authentic. So, as I said, that's probably the top piece of advice. Have confidence, have resilience, and you can do it. Take the leap of faith. If you think that you can't do it, hey, just do it. It'll happen.
I think Deb's been reading my notes. But it's such a great point you make. But I guess the one piece of advice which encumbers some of what Deb said is don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to act on an idea. If I hadn't acted on my succession plan idea back in 2004, it wouldn't have come to the climax that it did in 2012 with the successful completion of it. I concur with Deb on don't be afraid to challenge your client about anything if you really believe in it, because there's a lot of integrity that goes with challenging people, and people of a decent mindset will appreciate being challenged on things that mean something. And with my best friend having died all those years ago, I learned very early on that I wasn't going to take, well, I don't believe in this, or I don't know whether this is right or wrong, without a decent conversation, because I lived through that experience. But certainly not being afraid to challenge the client, not being afraid to talk about things that maybe are confronting to them and to even your team and business partner. Like the partnership went really well, but it wasn't all beer and skittles. There were times when we challenged each other because that's just what had to happen. But I think that's really important, that you have the courage to stand up to your beliefs and that One of the little things I will say, a little thing that I think's been invaluable for me, is that when you get to presenting an idea and the client's accepted your idea and they've signed whatever documentation they need to implement something, before they leave the office, I would say to them, now, we've just done this. Would you mind repeating back to me in your words what you think we've just done? And more often than not, the client will need a little bit of coaching through that to get it exactly right. But after a few minutes, they'll walk out of the room and they will have expressed themselves pretty much in their own words about what they've done. They know they've got what we talked about, but more importantly, you know that they've left the room and they know what's going on. And then you can obviously file note that little episode in your notes. But I just felt that from a moralistic standpoint, I wanted the person to understand what they just done, because usually it was a pretty significant decision. So in answering that one, don't be afraid to do anything that you think's worthwhile. Certainly challenging the clients and those situations, but also on anything that you believe that you need to have discussed in a meaningful way.
Well, Ash, the one piece of advice which I think is absolutely critical for every single person in all circumstances is to never stop learning. And learning is a personal responsibility. It's got nothing to do with your licensee, and it's got nothing to do with the government requirements. It is a personal responsibility to expand your knowledge in as many areas as possible. Now, for many, many, many years, we had a goal of spending 5% of our gross earnings on education. And that's what we did. Therefore, I was able to travel and I was able to do all these different things over the years, which has given me a tremendous scope of knowledge about the industry. And for many years, when there was an old product around called Whole of Life, and all of a sudden, these companies kept ringing me and say, tell me about it. What is it? Because the poor old person trying to settle a claim or answer a question had no idea. But they were able to come to somebody who had clearly learned about what it was. So never stop learning is, I think, a huge hint for people to succeed.
Well said.
We hope that you've taken a lot from this episode and feel positive about the future of advice. A huge shout out to Deb, Bill and Peter for their time, knowledge, and willingness to guide the new generation of advisors. Thanks again to the AFA and Advice Intelligence. The future is bright. See you next time.